trying to forge a new beginning in Mali. After months of protests and a military takeover, an interim leader is named for a return to civilian rule. But will Malians accept their new leaders? And will the new arrangement get international support? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Hala Mahieddine. The people of Mali have had a challenging few months. Their military has been in power since August after forcing the resignation of President Ibrahim Boubacar Keita. Now, as the nation marks its 60th Independence Day, those behind the coup have named interim leaders to oversee the return to civilian rule. Former Defence Minister Bamako has been named president of the transitional government. He was appointed by a group of 17 people chosen by the military junta. And the leader of last month's military coup, Colonel Assimi Goita, will be his vice president.
The message to the Malian people is a message of sacred union around Mali, and I ask them to support the armed forces of defence and security. This is the opportunity for me today to congratulate and encourage them for all their efforts to bring security and peace to Mali. And I also urge the Malian people to support our partner forces.
Well, Mali's opposition says it was not involved in the appointment of the interim leaders, and there have been mixed reactions on the ground of the capital, Bamako.
I would have liked us to choose a politician because Mali has been a democracy for almost 25 years. I think there are major actors who have the vision, who have the experience and who really have the rigor to lead this transition.
There are personalities who are less divisive, and I think he is one of the least divisive personalities in the country. But really the situation can only be resolved through a national awakening. Therefore, it will not be the president alone, but all the Malian political, civil and military actors to bring the transition to a successful conclusion.
I'm very happy that it's purely apolitical. He's also a career soldier, several times chief of staff, and has held high positions in the army. The fact that he studied in Russia opens the way to Russia too.
Well, Nicholas Huck has been following the developments from the Senegalese capital, Dakar.
During a military parade celebrating Mali's independence, the leader of the junta, Colonel Assimi Goita, addressed the crowd, saying it's a new beginning, the return of the state, and the end of corruption. A new president has been announced. The international community wanted to see a civilian. Well, it is a retired colonel, former defense minister under Ibrahim Boubacar Keita, Ndao, that has been announced and that will be sworn into office on Friday. The junta are not leaving power, though. A vice president has been nominated, and it's Goita himself who will be in charge of security and defense. Well, they have to succeed where the former government of Keita has failed, which is to bring back peace in the center and in the north of the country, where groups such as Al-Qaeda affiliate Jamaat Nusratul Islam wal Muslimin and the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara have been launching attacks, and there's been an uptick of violence, especially in the center region of Mopti. That's one of their challenges, but there's others. Half of the population is dependent on humanitarian aid. It is the most expensive UN operation in the country, $1 billion a year and 14,000 UN soldiers, adding to the 4,000 French soldiers that are on the ground. And some of the critics say is because of the presence, of the heavy presence of these actors, that there hasn't been enough investment in good governance and in the state being present in the north and the center. So that's the challenge ahead. No response from the ECOWAS or France, the former colonial power, in terms of the announcement of these new leadership. But clearly, there's a lot of work ahead for Assimi Goita and the new president, Ndao.
Well, let's take a look at how things have unfolded in Mali. The protests against then-President Ibrahim Boubacar Keita began in early June. Many accused him of corruption, economic mismanagement, and disputed his victory in the 2018 elections. Nearly a month later, several protesters were killed during a crackdown by security forces. Then, as the protests continued, military leaders took power and briefly detained Keita on August 18th, forcing him to resign. The international community condemned the coup, fearing political instability. Regional UN and French forces have been in Mali fighting against armed groups. Well, the coup leaders are now under pressure to hand over power to civilians, but they've said Mali's transition will last at least 18 months. Well, let's bring in our guests. From Accra, we're joined by Chukwuemeka Eze, the Executive Director of the West African Network for Peacebuilding. Joining us from Copenhagen, Professor Kwesi Aning, a visiting researcher at the Danish Institute of International Studies and the Director of Research at Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Centre in Ghana. And finally, from Paris, we're joined by Vincent Rougeux, a journalist and writer focusing on West Africa and a lecturer at the Sciences Po University. Gentlemen, a warm welcome to all of you. Let me start with you, Chukwuemeka, in Accra. We've seen a lot of toing and froing, a coup d'etat, various leaders coming in and out. But what do the Malian people want? Who do everyday Malians want to govern their country?
I think if you look at Ghana as a country, they've passed through a lot of political instability, mainly, first of all, because of the nature and character of the history of its independence, and especially going through the process of assimilation under the French government during the colonial era. But also more importantly is that there are now many ungoverned spaces in Mali, which also endears it to the kind of insecurity it's facing at the moment. So little wonder why you have issues around security challenges, violent extremism, issues around poverty, issues around bad governance, lack of transparency in the electoral processes, and all the other issues that can be as a result of cultural clashes between what the Malians really want and what they inherited from the French government.
So given that situation, Chukwuemeka, would you say that Malians, especially with an eye on the long-lasting insecurity and security challenges, would you say the general population is actually quite happy with a coup d'etat and a military leadership?
I think it cannot be absolute. Some sections of the society might be happy, but others will not, especially those who are progressives, because they understand the implication of a coup d'etat. They also understand that at the end of the day, they will still institutionalize democratic governance, and that will take them back. However, it's also as a result of the way and manner we've been able to manage the issues over a period of time. Enforcement of peace can only be a temporary measure. The institutionalization of reconciliation and recovery mechanisms have not been well rooted in Mali. And that is why after even the 2012 coup d'etat, we are exactly where we are today. And in another form is also that when you do not also punish offenders to the extent that it becomes a deterrent to all those who want to plan coup d'etat, this is the result you get.
OK, let's get your view now, Professor Aning. What do you say everyday Malians want? Because we've had these repeated coup d'etats, a military takeover, a leader is elected, and then they're protesting against them. Where does the future lie for Malians? Is there any kind of leadership that would be acceptable to the population on the whole? Or do you think we're going to continue to see this reliance on security being provided by outside sources, by the UN, for example, or by France, because there's so much political instability within Mali itself?
No, actually, I think all that the Malians are looking for is an inclusive, responsible, cooperative, government that delivers on social welfare. And I think the notion that, Mali's challenges arise out of ungoverned spaces is actually not true. I mean, I think the fundamental discursive issue that is also related to your question, really, is what kind of and degrees of governance mechanisms are desirable in any landscape. How do these different spaces get governed and how do they function? And in the Malian space, it's about water, it's about everyday security, it's about education, it's about jobs, and it's about a responsible government in Bamako that responds to the everyday needs of its citizens. Bamako, for a long time, has only collected taxes and has hardly ever given anything back. Corruption has been a problem, and with an army that is incapable because it is underfunded of providing that very basic security. And from my own experience in northern Mali, as far back as 2009, what Malians in the north wanted is not because they were ungoverned, it's because they wanted to be understood and to be provided with the basic necessities of life. The narrative that Goita and his team are bringing on board, and here I agree with Dr. Eze, the narrative they are bringing on board, that is making it a popular narrative, is that, look, we need to stabilize the situation and over time hand over to a democratic regime. The strategy of issuing orders just will not work, because when Keita and his team were misgoverning the country, the same people and institutions, multilateral organizations, who are now issuing instructions, get quiet. France has been there, and France is part of the challenge.
Okay.
Bekan was there, and they weren't able to help in bringing the stability that the country needed.
So what do you think of the incoming president, who also happens to be a former military man and spent some time in the military himself? Do you think he's equipped for these challenges? Will he be able to provide the kitchen table, the solutions to these kitchen table issues that Malians are looking for? Or do you think the focus has been too far on the security aspect and everything else is falling by the wayside?
No, I think the Malians are looking for stability, for economic livelihoods that takes into consideration the challenges that they are facing. The arrangement that has been put in place now is a political game that ECOWAS was pushing extremely hard, but that kept quiet all these years. So yes, you want somebody who is not in a uniform. We've given you somebody who is not in a uniform. Okay, we need to go back to the drawing board, really with the Malians, and to say, how do we move from here? Let's not forget that Mr. Diko is out there who speaks and wins massive support. Okay, the shift from a purely military takeover to a popular uprising makes this coup slightly different from the primarily military stuff that we have seen around. Okay. And that is why both the AU and the ECOWAS's approach must also be slightly different in dealing with this particular group.
Okay, let's get the view from Paris now. Vincent Rouger, we're looking at a situation in Mali. They've had 60 years of independence from France, and yet France seems to be playing a more active role than ever in Mali. Do you think this is impacting in some way the instability that we're seeing in Mali? Or do you think it's France's presence in the country is not helping secure any kind of stability, political or otherwise, moving forward?
What appears significant is that yesterday, it was, as you may know, the 60th anniversary of the independence of Mali. 4 military coups in the meantime. Assimi Goita, who is really the strong man on stage, made an appeal to the Malian people so that they support the foreign partners in the war against jihadism. And he named Barkhane, the French operation. He named MINUSMA, the UN mission in Mali, and also Takuba, which is this nascent gathering of special forces from Europe. France is there, that's very true. But I may say also that, the era of puppets and puppeteers is over. And when talking to French strategists, military or politicians, some of them would say that France is still there, but reluctantly so. One point I think is very interesting to insist on is that you were asking the question about the new man. We must be aware that Mr. Bando, this retired top officer, was also a plan B for Assimi Goita. The first aim of Goita was to be the transitional president, and it's under ECOWAS pressure that he had somehow to compromise. So it's clearly a transition, but it's a military transition in military fatigue and with green beret. And it leads to some kind of frustration, including with people involved in what they call the M5 movement, the movement of the 5th of June, this kind of civic insurgency, which emerged in last June. In fact, the militaries, they just gave the final knock, the final stroke. But Ibrahim Boubacar Keita, the ex-president, was extremely unpopular. And as you may know, no one came to the street to try to save his regime. No one in Mali, no one outside Mali.
Okay, but in terms of France's role there, you say France is there somewhat reluctantly. If there is now a new military regime in power and they're going to focus on the security issues and so on and so forth, why does France feel the need to stay?
Well, look, it's quite simple. When France arrived on the turf in 2012, it was at a time when there was a real danger that jihadi forces coming from the north rush to Bamako and take power, because there is something of a hollow political situation there. So then they had to enlarge to other countries from the Sahel region. And the aim of the military strategists in France was, in fact, to, at one point, pass the task to Pan-African force, the so-called G5 force. But it didn't work because, on the turf, when you talk to officers or even simple soldiers, be it in Niger, in Mali, in Burkina Faso, to name 3 of that countries, they say, we are not ready, we are not equipped, we are not properly trained to fight. So, like it or not, we need that kind of support at this stage.
Okay. Dr. Eze, do you agree with that? Do you think that the French presence in Mali and in West Africa is needed?
Well, I think that whether it is perception or reality, the truth of the matter is that most of the West African citizens are thinking that they have come of age to take their destiny into their hand. And therefore, if the kind of security architecture that is being institutionalized, not just in West Africa, not just in Mali, but in the entire West Africa region, is still largely being teleguided from the outside, then little wonder why the issue of sustainability becomes a problem. In this instance, there is always that perception between the sub-regional organization, ECOWAS, and the intentions of France. And therefore, most times, ECOWAS will think that some of its efforts is being sabotaged because at some point it's difficult for Mali to know whether they have allegiance to ECOWAS or to the government of in Paris.
That's an interesting point. I see you nodding there, Professor Anning. What are ECOWAS's options here? Because there does seem to be this this pull, as Dr. Eze was saying, between, is our allegiance to France or is our allegiance to ECOWAS?
ECOWAS really finds itself between a rock and a very hard place because the principles and the norms inherent in its own conventions and protocols have not been applied consistently over time. And I think, with your permission, Mali and the situation that Mali is facing now goes way beyond the boundaries of Mali. This is about recreating a new political space within which citizens of West Africa and West African states can feel that their voices can be heard and then they are playing a role in their country's future. I mean, we are seeing similar developments as my colleague in Paris just described in terms of Keita's incompetence and corruption in Guinea, in Benin, and in La Côte d'Ivoire. The shift in how the constitutional mechanisms are supposed to work. Now, ECOWAS is not speaking up in these particular cases. So even when France is not working as optimally as it ought to, and citizens don't trust France, ECOWAS itself has a credibility problem.
OK, we're in the final 5 minutes, gentlemen. So I just want to get your views on what the way out of this is, what the future holds, in a bid to bring better governance to Mali and a better situation moving forward. Where does the solution lie? Professor Anning, if you could give us your views.
Well, first and foremost, once more, going back to the drawing board and saying, how do we fashion out a governance system in which different voices can be given a space and a place to contribute to determining and designing their own future.
Okay.
Practical, commonsensical, based on their lived experiences and the challenges that they have gone through.
Okay. Vincent Ougeux, your views on where the way ahead for Mali lies, and do you think that a future for Mali means less involvement from France?
Yeah, okay. To put it bluntly, first of all, the junta needs to be credible. So if it appears as a coup d'etat with just, civilian disguisement, with the time passing, it will become extremely difficult for Goita and his friends to keep an upper hand. Number two, there is a deep need for restoration, if not creation, of a credible state. To give you just an example, an agreement, a peace agreement, was signed in Algiers in 2015, 5 years ago. A very interesting report was published last month, and it showed that only less than 20% of the specifications of that accord have been enforced. And plus the fact that there is a sense of resentment in the Malian population against the corruption and impunity and injustice. So if you succeed in this, on these three floors, you may hope for a better situation. But everything needs to be proved in a country, once again, who has experienced for military coup. Just one very last thing, and it's maybe anecdotal, but I think it's interesting enough that the new transitional president, Bandao, was the aide-de-camp of Moussa Traoré, who was a restless dictator and who passed away, by the way, 1 week ago. So we have here a history of a very hectic successions of attempts to establish a genuine democracy, failures, and coup d'etat. So to get out of this, you need to create or recreate a state to speak of.
Okay. And finally, I'll leave you the last words, Dr. Chukwuemeka Eza. Do you think Mali needs to go back to the drawing board and start from scratch?
Well, I think the first focus should not be on the urgency of election just to tick the box. So there must be institutionalized mechanism to stabilize Mali. The second thing is that I do not think that it is fair, not just on ECOWAS protocol and mechanisms as it relates to good governance, but also to the conscience of the rest of Malians that the junta will serve as in any guise within the transition government. And finally, it is important that Mali begin to look beyond Bamako to an inclusive government that includes the women, includes all the regions in Mali, and also rooted within the context of reconciliation and restoration of social justice.
And is that likely to happen with a military-led administration?
Not with this current junta. I think it is going to be a design, a process going forward, but with the military junta acting either as the vice president or serving in the transition in any guise, I think it's a recipe that might allow others to try it in future, knowing fully well that there will be power to be shared.
OK, well, we'll have to wait and see what lies ahead for Mali. A complicated story, but certainly one with many potential outcomes. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for a fascinating discussion. Thank you to Dr. Chukwuemeka Eza, Professor Kwesi Aning, and Monsieur Vincent Oujeu. And thank you too for watching. Remember, you can see this programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And remember, for further discussion, just head to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. Or you can tweet me directly @Hala Mohideen. But for now, from me and the whole team here in Doha, it's bye-bye.